All right, I think we can get started here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, everyone. My name is David Kanter. I'm the chair of the International Nitrogen Initiative and really excited to welcome you all today to this second webinar in a webinar series that I started just at the beginning of the summer on the various challenges and opportunities of halving nitrogen waste, which is quickly emerging as the central policy goal when it comes to addressing our complicated relationship with nitrogen. The first webinar back in June was about the challenge of translating the science of halving nitrogen waste into policy. And we felt it was very important as the second follow-up to focus on halving nitrogen waste in the global south. There is no region or set of countries where this tension between nitrogen as an essential resource and nitrogen as a major pollutant is more stark. There is no set of regions in the world where the variation between countries is more stark, from countries with far too little nitrogen to countries with far too much. And so I'm really excited. We have a great panel of speakers with us today who'll be sharing their insight, their research on a variety of cases in the global south, ranging from Africa to Latin America to South Asia. I would be remiss, I know obviously if you're on this webinar, you probably also are very much aware of the upcoming International Nitrogen Conference, the next one, which will be in just over 3 months' time at Guru Gobind Singh Indraprastha University in New Delhi, in India. I'm sure many of you have submitted abstracts. We are at the very end of the review process, and you will be notified next week on that front. But we have been incredibly impressed and for me, it's super encouraged by the quality and the quantity of those abstracts, and excited to welcome you all to New Delhi in India early in the new year. So just briefly before I hand it over to our speakers, we have 4 great speakers today. Dr. Vincent Aduramigba from Obafemi Awolowo University in Nigeria. He is also the regional director for I&I Africa. We have Dr. Annie Yang at the University of Edinburgh, who's also led the South Asian Nitrogen Hub's policy work. We have Dr. Sarath Nissanka, who hopefully will be able to join us from the University of Peradeniya in Sri Lanka, also a key member of the South Asian Nitrogen Hub, and Dr. Gisleine Cunha-Zeri from the Earth System Science Center in Brazil, a leading expert on Latin America's nitrogen policies and their effectiveness. So I'm really excited to have this great panel with us today. And with that, I want to hand it over to Vincent, who will kick us off with his presentation. Just also to let you know the way that this webinar will work, we will have roughly 10-minute presentations from each of the speakers. Then there will be a short discussion amongst myself and the 4 speakers, and then we will open it up to Q&A from all of you, because we want to hear all of your great questions. So with that, Vincent, the floor is yours. Feel free to share your screen and we can go from there.
Thank you very much, David. Good day all, morning, afternoon, evening. So David has said, my name is Vincent, so I'm very happy to be with us. So I hope you can hear me. So the few minutes I have, I'm just going to be sharing with you some of the issues that pertains to the continent of Africa. In the overview, we are aware there's increasing human population, not only in Africa, all over the whole world. We have more than 7 billion people now. And Africa and South Asia are actually most affected by undernourishment and malnutrition, where nitrogen is an important element for food production. So in the overview, I said there's an ever-increasing human population in Africa, this demands corresponding increase in food production. And low nitrogen is a critical challenge in many of the agro ecosystems in African continent, from East Africa to West and Central Africa to Southern Africa and also to North Africa. So in addressing these challenges and the problems, significant changes are actually needed to focus research, capacity development, and multi-stakeholder partnership. And end waste and end losses from Africa, since I don't have too much time, actually come from three principal components: from agriculture, from the industry, and also from the environment. Well, Africa is classified among too little N. So, but even the too little N that we have, you see, have a lot of losses when fertilizer nitrogen are applied to the soil through agriculture. So we have losses coming from agriculture, from the industry, and from the environment. And again, from agriculture, the crop production and onion production happens to be the principal culprit for this. So what do I want to say? For us in Africa, I believe we need an innovation system. And what is the innovation system? We have to have a system where researchers, extension, farmers, other crop or livestock, agro-processors, and marketers and consumers come together, because it's a holistic problem. So we are talking about the waste and the losses and also the use and the management. The researchers, the farmers, all these people in the value chain must come together. And in coming together, we actually brainstorm and we can find out what is actually applicable to us in Africa. If the research scientists are looking at end waste and losses, and the farmers and the agro-processors are not seeing it from that perspective, there's going to be a disconnect. So we have proposed, and this will be using in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Kenya, in East Africa, and Rwanda in East Africa, and Cameroon in Central Africa. We are now moving from the linear research and development model, where people are doing their things. We have a lot of things in the publication, but they are actually not useful for policymakers because they are not involved from the onset. So the first step for us to solve this problem in the continent of Africa is what we call the innovation system, where all of us sit together, we agree, we look at the common problems, and we prioritize what we can solve. So, and in doing this, we are actually solving some problem. What are the problems that we are solving? We are looking at policy issues that are required to tackle the problem faced with air pollution, that it will be affordable. So the innovation system helps us to look at this. So we move from the domain of research and because we have a lot of work that have been done where we can see from publication, body grade publication, and also from policy. So we discuss this, then from there we can synthesize and also talks about what we need to do. Then not only that, I believe for us as Africans, as we look at this issue, it pertains to us, we have to promote and transfer proven end technologies that are technically appropriate, that are also economically viable and acceptable to Africans. So in as much as we are looking at the global North and South cooperation, but we're looking at end losses, end waste and losses within the context of the African continent. So it's not that we take something from Europe or from Latin America or from America, and no, we have to domesticate, and that is why we're looking at the concept of the of the innovation system. And not only that, when we look at this, where since Africa is actually lagging behind, and we found out that there are significant losses to underground water body from end application on the field, leading to pollution. So there is need to develop human capital through investment in more research and development in Africa. So with this, we'll be able to be in alignment with the UN Environment Program that says sustainable nitrogen management is important for a pollution-free and climate-stable planet. But to do this, it has to be in the context. Even in Africa, what is going to work in East Africa might not be wholly applicable to West Africa. So we are moving from the global to the continent and to also what we call sub-regions. Then in each of the sub-regions, for example, in West Africa, where I'm from, Nigeria can look at what is more appropriate. And that is why I say the technologies for N has to be technically appropriate and economically viable and also acceptable to us as Africans. So, but we need a lot of human capital development. And this comes in through investment so that when we have methodology that is useful in Europe or in the global north, we can also try it in Africa. And at the end of the day, our database, our data science is the same, but the experience might not be the same, but of course, we're using the same methodology, and we can compare and contrast results. And at the end of the day, I believe we'll be able to say with UN Environment, we're in the same program with them, that we can actually achieve sustainable nitrogen management. And we can also begin to look at a free climate and a stable planet that is free of nitrogen pollution to some extent, or that can be reduced. So on that note, I have to say that in Africa, we're willing for collaboration. We have a lot of challenges, but those challenges can be overcome through networking and through appropriate relationship with our northern colleagues who have gone far. So I think those are a few things I have to say from my own end. I want to say thank you very much. And my email address is there if we need to say some other things. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vincent, for that great overview of the challenges and opportunities in Africa. I now want to pass it over to Annie Yang from the University of Edinburgh. Vincent, if you can stop sharing your screen just so that Annie can do that, that would be great. Thank you so much. And now I pass the baton to Annie. Go ahead, the floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk to you about sort of South Asia, and the reason that I'm doing that is because of my involvement with the UKRI South Asian Nitrogen Hub. So this is a huge multi-million project that brings together 32 research institutes from the UK and from South Asia. And there's 4 research programs, but one of the one that I'm involved with for the most part is building the nitrogen policy arena. We've done a fair amount of work on that I wanted to share with you, and then some other sort of additional insights. So, I mean, as David was saying, I mean, the nitrogen issue is everywhere, affects everyone, but South Asia in particular is recognised as a hotspot for nitrogen emissions, and so I just wanted to show this information here, which sort of shows that for nitrous oxide there was actually a 36% increase from 2000 to 2015. Where India is a major contributor with these emissions, when we look at these things per capita, actually see that Nepal and Pakistan and Bhutan can also have high figures. And with nitrous oxide, as you'd expect, agriculture is the biggest source. And then we have ammonia, which also has increased by a similar amount in that same time period. And agriculture, again, is the major source here, and this is linked closely to commercial fertilizer application. However, that's not the same case for all countries. And again, if we look more closely at the individual countries, Maldives and Bhutan is the consumption of biomass and fossil fuels as the major source for ammonia. And then when we come to NOx, which for some countries, this isn't any more such an issue, but certainly is in the case of South Asia. So NOx emissions have actually from 2000 to 2015 risen by 107%. And the greatest relative increase has occurred in Afghanistan, which was 668%. So overall in South Asia, the culprit isn't so much agriculture, but in this case, sort of electricity and heat generation and transportation. So basically these results indicate that policy interventions have yet to reduce these increasing emissions across the region. And the treatment of different nitrogen compounds, of course, requires nuanced policies that distinguish between the needs and measures between the different nitrogen compounds to avoid pollution swapping. Some of the work we have done on this, like I said, related to policy, was this collection of nitrogen-related policies. And this is following a methodology similar to that used by David and colleagues for the global study. In this case, we used similar, but also adjusted to also include indirectly relevant policies. And from that, we were able to collect 966 policies, and we use this classification listed here to understand a bit better what characteristics those policies had, whether it was seen to have perhaps more positive implications for sustainable nitrogen management or negative. So we looked at each individual policy to classify them according to different criteria. And we can see from the figure that, obviously some countries had more policies. So in the case of India, it was 192. But it's important to recognise that not all of those policies actually recognise specifically nitrogen as part of the issue or looking solutions around sustainable nitrogen management. They just have implication for how it comes into the environment and how it's used. So with that, we also looked at the characteristics then of what could be an effective nitrogen policy. So this would include those that actually refer to reactive nitrogen, recognize it, and but there's very few policies that did that in the entirety. Then there's policies that actually look beyond the single sector, so across different sectors to sort of connect those dots. Also, those policies that use multiple policy instruments are also key. So they're thinking about data and methods, but also thinking about research and also thinking about regulation, etc. And then there's also those policies that think about the environmental sink, but not just in terms of air quality, but also the other impacts that nitrogen management can have to the environment. So if a policy contained all these different aspects, we at least understood it in terms of what the text could tell us as being effective. And for nitrogen, for the policies we found for South Asia, it was 6% that sort of contain these types of characteristics. And here's a few examples on the right from the Maldives National Action Plan on Air Pollutants, the Nepal's Adaptation Programme for Action to Climate Change. But David also asked to sort of identify some of the most more ambitious policy and measures. So I actually had a look, and that was based off a sort of a review that I did this week, just to look at some examples. And in this case, it was about organic farming, which I'm not an expert on, and I'm sure a lot of people can say more about these policies than I can, but it was just to highlight these three examples, one from Sri Lanka, one from Bhutan, and the other from Sikkim, so a northern state in India, and just sort of compare some of these three sort of policies. So I'm sure many of you are aware of what happened in Sri Lanka in 2021. So organic farming had also been discussed with previous governments. and there was always a sort of ambition to upscale organic farming in the country. Even in 2021, the agricultural policy had a plan in there to increase organic fertilizer use in Sri Lanka from 1% to 30%, but that was across 3 years. Then we come to May in 2021, where practically overnight, the president put forward this import ban on chemical fertilizer. So this was basically a desire to shift to organic practices, but it was also financially driven because the current fertilizer subsidy program at the time was estimated to cost $253 million in 2019. So this strict ban came into place, banning the import of fertilizers. And obviously the huge challenge there is forcing 2 million farmers plus to go organic kind of overnight when there's no existing capacity for producing that fertilizer in the first place. Then there was the adverse effect, of course, that has on crop yields. I think 30% drop when it came to rice, but I may be wrong on that. So the main issue, and experts have said that it's not necessarily it's not the issue with organic farming per se, but it was the speed, scale, and lack of sustainability in that implementation of that policy decision that was the huge issue. And I mean, there was opportunity there. So apparently there was this survey that showed 2/3 of farmers were actually in support of the government's vision to go organic. So that was about 80% of farmers, but with the understanding that would take more than a year and would be a slower shift. So I'll just move on to the next example. So for Bhutan, there was the National Framework for Organic Farming in 2006, and this then led to the program that was established in 2008. And basically the target for the country was to be organic by 100% organic by 2020. However, by 2020, I think it was estimated that 10% of crop production and just 2% of arable land was actually under sort of organic certification at that point. Now the target's been pushed back to 2035. So if as one of the challenges, if there was a banning of chemical fertilizers, that would still apparently affect sort of 1 in 3 farmers in Bhutan. So that's sort of 37% of farmers that are still using agrochemicals. It's obviously, like mentioned with the Sri Lankan case, of the drop in yield. So I think this was estimated at 24%. And so this, this ambition to be organic, and also this ambition to be self-sufficient and not be dependent on other countries, has also basically conflicted with that, because for food security, obviously, they've had to rely more heavily now on food import. And so that's also, been an issue. And also with COVID and other things, that's also, been a challenge. The lack of premium price, the pest and disease problems, anyhow. But when it comes to opportunities, I mean, there is a strong political will, and that's also come back forward since 2020, and there's been a renewed interest and planned investment into making this happen. The fact that the majority of small farmers also have low to no chemical inputs is also an opportunity there. And this moves me on to the sort of final example before, and this was for North India state. So this was a state that wanted to become 100% organic. This was first announced in 2003, and then followed in 2010 by a mission. And this was actually achieved. So they achieved this target by 2015. So, this included a phase out of chemical fertilizers, eventually a ban of imports into the state, but various other activities that took place to help reach that. And again, the opportunity was there because the majority of farmers were already, had traditional agroecological practices already in use. And sort of low chemical fertilizer usage. But some of the issues are sort of the push to sort of more homogenized farming systems, which is could affect resilience. And there's also people leaving the farming sector, which is another challenge. So just sort of lessons learned from those three examples. Of course, this requires, whether it's 100% organic or just transitioning into some, into sort of more integrated systems of, even if it was like the original Sri Lanka goal to get to 30%, it needs that political commitment, of course, but with that financial backing, obviously a gradual transition is very important too, not doing those things overnight. In the case of the Kim, this took 12 years. And also what was important, to develop a roadmap. So really think about all aspects: marketing, education, training, etc., capacity building, to really, make that action happen. So identifying the goal, but also formulating the actions necessary to get there. So I'll just come to my final slide. So I know I'm slightly over, but it was just the opportunities to halve nitrogen waste in South Asia. So reducing nitrogen waste is a highly desirable goal. It saves money, decreases undesirable environmental effects. Second being this early recognition of nitrogen threats, and that's already evident in the way that South Asian countries have been dealing with nitrogen and their involvement in nitrogen resolutions, which Nissanka will tell us more about. Transboundary issues requires coordinated responses, and that's also being facilitated by the South Asian Cooperative Environmental Programme, which facilitates that cooperation between the 8 countries. And then also the fact that there's a South Asian nitrogen roadmap that's in development to also sort of, focus those coordinated, coherent actions across the region. So sorry for overrunning, but that was my last slide. And thank you again to all the partners involved in all this work. Thank you.
Not at all. Thank you so much, Annie, for such a detailed, insightful presentation. Really appreciate it. I realized that originally the order had Gisleine going next, but with Nissanka here, and obviously Sri Lanka being one of those South Asia nitrogen hub countries, it may make sense. So, Nissanka, if you're here and you can hear us and present, it may make sense for you to go next, just to do a deeper dive into the Sri Lanka case. So if you can share, I don't know if you can share your screen, otherwise we have your slides.
David, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Can you share the?
Yes, Edin,
okay.
Edin, would you mind sharing? That would be great. Perfect. Thank you. So go ahead, Nissanka, and then when you want to go to next slide, just say next slide, and Edin will move it for you.
Okay. Yes. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, David, for giving this opportunity. And also, I want to thank David and the Annie here. You all have been helping us in developing this process. Now, I endorse all the justification and status presented by Dr. Vincent and also the Annie. So then it is common to all of us. And actually, like mentioned, South Asian region has been identified as a hotspot. Many countries has been using fertilizers. Overdosage is a very common thing. And even though the farmers are advised to do that, sometimes they are not adhering to the government regulation like that. So then therefore we have been in the network of South Asian Nitrogen Hub. And also, I'm happy to say that we are also with the collaboration of all, we are in the forefront with respect to taking few decisions. So then, can you go to the next slide? Okay. So then actually, we all know that UNIA 4, we started the sustainable nitrogen management business, and then with the help of South Asian countries and also UNDP, UNIA, we launched the Sustainable Nitrogen Management campaign in Colombo 2020 23rd, 24th of October 2019. And there the ambition is to reduce the nitrogen waste by 50% by 2030. In parallel, so then since this activity was held in Sri Lanka and also called this as a Colombo Declaration, at that time we developed the Sri Lanka status report on sustainable nitrogen management. All information available at that point we gathered and developed into a document to highlight this is an like a burning issue for us. So then action has to be taken urgently. So can you go to the next slide? So then actually following up the same, again Sri Lanka led the resolution on sustainable nitrogen management, which was co-sponsored by Brazil, Maldives, Pakistan and Uganda. And also this was adapted in 2nd March 2022. So that was also a great achievement we all like achieved together. So in that actually, though we were initially having the 50% reduction ambition in the Colombo Declaration due to many like member countries suggestions and the arguments. So then we had to agree to a significant reduction of nitrogen losses by 2030 beyond. That is what actually we achieved last year as actually initiated from the South Asian Nitrogen Hub and coordinated with many other member countries. So in that actually after this was adapted, since this was Sri Lanka led, and it was, I mean, Sri Lanka was asked why not go for developing the National Action Plan first and at least develop the draft, and then it is going to be sort of a case study for others to follow as well. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay. So then then the Ministry of Environment, actually, since I am from the University of Peradeniya, I have been involved in this nitrogen, global level nitrogen business from 2009. So then with the ministry is actually, Ministry of Environment is the focal point, and together we are doing this activity. So then with the ministry, we established an interagency committee on sustainable nitrogen management, with the main objective of that is to develop the roadmap for the National Action Plan for Sustainable Nitrogen Management. In that, again, this the interagency, all the respective ministries, departments, institutes got together, and they are in the one network of the interagency committee. And then again, we divided that into 4 subcommittees representing agriculture, and then transport and energy, and water and health, and the biodiversity. I mean, this is sort of an arbitrary type, but anyway, depending on the ministry's involvement and their role. So then with the majority decision, we identified these 4 sectors. And then after that, even they at the initial meeting, they were requesting, so then they are not aware about this very much, and they want to listen to us what all the sustainable nitrogen management, Colombo Declaration, even resolution like that. So then actually I took the leadership, and we did several capacity building program of all these the interagency members involving, and also the inviting related other institute and key stakeholders as well. So then after that, actually it is going on, and a monthly and bi-monthly the progress meeting are carried out from, I mean, all the ministries responsible, department, institutes are involving that. So then on top of that, we thought that in order to review what the committee, subcommittees decision, and in order to guide them as well, so we established an expert committee, 10 to 12 member expert committee on sustainable management, sustainable nitrogen management, where the secretary to the Ministry of Environment chair the sessions. So then the main objective is to facilitate the development of National Action Plan on sustainable nitrogen management. Actually, in that, actually, University of Peradeniya actually directly involved in these sustainable nitrogen activities, and with the South Asian Nitrogen Hub project, and with the Annie and Roger group with the activity WP 1.1, we analyze all the policies related to environment, and there are, like Annie mentioned, there are about 115 policies, and then we categorize all these policies into different respective ministries and organizations. So then we actually we send a questionnaire asking what is their present status, what are the policies not in the online that we were using, in anything addition is there, and also any circulars, guidelines like that. So then we actually, for example, agriculture minister, all related policy related to agriculture, we went to the ministry and we asked them to go through and identify gaps, and then focus more on the nitrogen and the nutrient management, and propose us what they wanted to, what they are expecting to do in the future to achieve this objective. Next slide, please. Okay. So then we again we wanted to then again as a capacity building and as well as the awareness program, and also to get the stakeholders' view on the National Action Plan roadmap development. We had the first national symposium on sustainable nitrogen management, 22nd and 23rd June 2023, and all the related sectors and key ministers, for example, Agriculture Minister, Minister of Environment, and all the secretaries, additional secretaries joined in this meeting, and Annie and KST from the UK also supported. I mean, they came and help us in the workshop, especially focusing on how to get the stakeholders' views on going for the National Action Plan development. This was a very successful meeting, and we got a lot of like output, which is very much focus on, and also ambitions to a certain extent, whether we can do or not. But idea was like shared among, and also the suggestions were like put forward as goals and activities like that. So in these next slide, please. Okay, so then main objective of this symposium was to assess the current nitrogen status and nitrogen budget of related sectors, and identify policy gaps to minimize nitrogen pollution, and then share knowledge and experiences to explore venues for future research, and also interventions and advocacy to minimize nitrogen pollution, and finally drive directives to develop the National Action Plan on sustainable nitrogen. So then this was a 2-day activity, and first day, I mean, we dedicated for inviting the review type of presentation and posters to get all, for example, agriculture, industry, waste, health, biodiversity, all sectors, key scientists were invited to do review presentations. So then after that, once everybody get to know about, then we ran like a half a day type of workshop where the Annie and KSG took over and did the survey activity. Next slide, please. So the workshop activities. So then,
just so you know, just 2 more minutes if possible, just because we have one more presentation.
Interactive workshop and roadmap. So we had the meeting. Next slide, please. So then actually in that there are 3 activities: activity 1, activity 2, activity 3 is the one identification of sector action and measures to contribute to nitrogen action plan on sustainable nitrogen management. Again, we divided the whole group into agriculture sector, industry and transport, biodiversity, and waste and water and health sector. So then we got, next slide please. So then we got all the, then they were given time to discuss, and all the feedbacks were documented. Next slide, please, like that. So then next slide, please. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so then, for example, agriculture sector, they were identifying, I mean, there are about 4 groups, because there are large number of representation from the agriculture sector. So then had 9 goals, I mean, reduce nitrogen waste, reduce, increase the nitrogen use efficiency, and reduce post-harvest losses. Likewise, I mean, I can share this, and then list of goals were identified, and also agriculture sector and series of activities for to achieve each and every goal was identified as well. Next slide, please. Okay, I will go. I'm not going to discuss the activities for each and every goal. So then activities were identified. Next, please. Next one, please. So the next, okay. So then agriculture sector, we had, okay, 4 groups. All the 4 groups objective like goals and the activity plans are being presented. Next, please. So then next one, okay. So then industry and transport, then again, they had the goal, I mean, the electrification of public transport by 20% by 2040, and the shift in transport modes from private to public sector. Next, please. Okay, and then they transform the industry zones to eco-industry park like that, and then fuel switch into green fuel, renewable energy in transport and industry. These were the goals identified by the, and activities were listed by the industry and transport sector. So then next, please. So then water and health, again, the safe and adequate water for all. So then again, the different goals and the activities were identified. All were very positive to go for these as much as possible. Next, please. So then again, biodiversity, again, the set of goals were identified. These were the list of outcome we received. Next, please. Okay, now currently we are in the process of reviewing all these findings were again shared with the subcommittees, expert committee, and also we have requested from all ministries sending a questionnaire, and also, like I mentioned, identify policies to submit their views regarding how to achieve, and we are in the process of like compiling all, and in November 2nd week again we are going to have a detailed committee meeting with all and reviewing what we have received, all related with, I mean, in that all relevant stakeholders were informed, and interagency committee on sustainable management are being now regularly meeting, and updating is done, and an expert committee is helping this activity, and also assess in and we are assessing all the SDGs and NDCs, other relevant government submissions made in this regard are also being reviewed, and we don't want to repeat here and there. We want to analyze all and develop a concise and one document where the nitrogen related losses could be addressed in the future. So next slide, please. Okay. Also, then we had this, we just completed 2nd to 6th annual conference of the South Asian Nitrogen Hub project. There actually all the South Asian countries executive committee discuss in detail regarding the roadmap to the sustainable nitrogen management in the South Asian region. I think that document is in the draft form, so it has been discussed and progressing. Dr. Basia is taking the leadership, and also we had a very good gathering and also the productive workshop. So then we are proceeding. Hope that we are planning to have the draft national action plan by end of this year. Thank you very much for the opportunity given.
Thank you so much, Nissanka. Thank you for, it's really exciting to see a country, and especially you leading that country's efforts to put in a national action plan. It's never easy to be the first country to do something, especially with the challenges that Sri Lanka has faced, both on nitrogen and more generally. And so it's just really exciting and admirable and impressive to see the work that you've done and powering through there and setting an example for other countries and for the rest of us, in terms of also how you personally as a scientist can be so helpful in driving the conversation forward on this topic in Sri Lanka. So thank you very much. Our final speaker for this series, before we get into a discussion, really excited to welcome Gisleine Cunha-Zeri from Brazil, from the Earth System Science Center in Brazil. Yes, Gisleine, the floor is yours.
Hi, David. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Can I share my screen? Oh, yeah. Okay. So today I'll talk a bit about the research I've been doing for the past couple of years. So, okay. So I'll talk about just one minute here. the halving nitrogen waste in Latin America. So first of all, I'd like to give you a quick regional background. The Latin American region is huge. It's very populated. It's about 1.5% of the global population in the world. Urban population is 84%, but we also have some extreme poverty rate, inflation, unemployment. Per capita growth is less than 1% expected for this year. Agriculture is the most important economic sector for the region. And Brazil and Mexico are among the 15 most populous country in the world, and also among the 15 largest economies. So agriculture is a huge thing here. So it's 40% of a total labor force. And for that, fertilizer use doubled over the last 2 decades. And the energy sector, energy supply, 70% is from non-renewable, the fossil fuels, and renewable we have about 30%. And it's just a quick background. So here we published this article 2 years ago about the nitrogen emissions in Latin America. Then we developed this conceptual framework of nitrogen emissions. So the key finds of this research is that human actions are triggering substantial changes in the nitrogen cycle in Latin America. So nitrogen pollution is one of the biggest environmental problem in the region. And the driving forces behind these actions are the productive activities to meet the high demands for food, energy, and housing by a fast-growing population. So what we have here is that these productive activities are related to intense biomass burning to clear land for agriculture, expansion of fertilizer use to attend the high demand and trade of agricultural commodities, and biofuels production. And here, when you say that this demand is by a fast-growing population, it's not only within the region, but also worldwide. For example, China is one of the biggest importer of agricultural commodities from the region. So if you have the world population growing, of course, it affects very much the region. Also, another activities, rising consumption of fossil fuels and other oil-based products by the industrial and transport sectors. And finally, the problems related to urbanization. We have uncontrolled urban sprawls leading to sewage and sanitation issues. So here we can see it's too much information to see, but if you have a quick look in this emissions in Latin American countries, we can see that for all of them, NOx is really a big issue. And N2O, it's not the most emitted nitrogen reactive. So it's difficult to explain exactly, maybe because N2O is more present in climate policies, but I would like to have more time to analyze this particular emissions for each country. But what we can clearly see here is that emissions are increasing all over the region in all countries. Even when you can see also that I said that NOx emissions are the highest, but even when we put together ammonia and N2O, NOx is still an issue. And one of the reasons is that when you see the policies that we have for the region, here is just a table with the national policies, just some numbers concerning the type of policies. Most of them are from commerce, framework, and regulatory. But what we can see is that there are no specific, exclusive, or integrated policies to address nitrogen pollution in the region and also within countries. So most of these policies are related to water and air sinks. For example, regulatory policies, they focus on the definition of water and quality control. And then we have the agricultural sector, that it's by far the most covered by policies, followed by the waste sector. But I just find 5 policies for the waste sector in this group of policies instruments here. And the majority is to cover the agriculture sector, but it's also focused on commerce type of policy, that it's about the definition of production standards for fertilizers, and some of them for plantation, but it's not exclusive about ammonia on N2O or nitrogen. They have, in many cases, policies that include a nitrogen species in this formulation, but it's not exclusive. Of course, there are some exceptions, but is what is happening. And a small number of policies are related to the energy sector, industry, and transport. So maybe this is why NOx is an issue, because countries are getting more industrialized. We are increasing the use of fossil fuels. So this is a huge problem here. So when you talk about the challenges, we can see that one of the biggest problems is the institutional problems all over the region: political instability, poor governance, social crisis, and economic slowdown is spread across the region. So it's difficult to have policy formulation and policy implementation when you have a situation like that. So we can see that we have a lack of policies to address nitrogen emissions from the energy sector. We have a lack of incentives for engage in sustainable nitrogen practices in the agricultural sector, like BNF or NU. And also we have a lack of investment in urban planning, basic sanitation services, and industrial and domestic waste treatment plants. And also a lack of incentives to expand the production and use of renewable energy and biofuels. And for last but not less important is the lack of investment in research and development, and also in technology and innovation to deal with the nitrogen pollution problem. But on the other side, we have some opportunities that I'm talking in general for the region. But of course, if you go into some case studies or in particularly countries, we have differences, both concerning challenges and opportunities. Here's just about a quick view for the whole region. So we think that an opportunity should be expand the participation of countries' representatives like scientists, decision makers, policymakers, stakeholders in international cooperation projects, especially related to the proposal for a global binding instrument for nitrogen management. We also think that we have this opportunity to including sustainable nitrogen management in regional and international economic blocks and forums like the Mercosur and the ECLEC, and also the the Europe and Mercosur agreement, that it's on the table for discussion. So then it's opportunity to include all this sustainable nitrogen management in these forums and blocks. And also another opportunity should be the capacity building and communication with the development of outreach and education programs on the benefits and impacts of nitrogen and sustainable practices. And finally, I think it could be also important to put on the table is the Brazil's resurgence in multilateral diplomatic relations for the reestablishment of regional and international political and trade agreements. Because for the last couple of years, Brazil, which is a very important player in the international environmental diplomacy, was a bit out of the discussions. So now with this new government, we are back. So I think it should be a great opportunity for the whole region to have Brazil to lead this discussion and include Latin American countries in more opportunities to halve nitrogen. So this is all for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gisleine. That was really great, and a great summary of the opportunities and challenges facing Latin America. Perfect. So if all of the panelists can, if you don't mind turning on your videos, I'm gonna ask a couple of questions now, and as I'm doing that, to all of the attendees, please, any questions you have, please put them in the chat. The I&I operations manager, Edin Thornton, is going to be keeping an eye on that. Will be helping us kind of navigate your great questions. I have so many questions. I guess one place to start, Nissanka, with your presentation, you went into great detail on the kind of process of developing a national action plan in Sri Lanka. And one thing that I've spent a lot of time thinking about, and that I imagine is a great challenge, is because nitrogen doesn't respect the political and environmental boundaries that we've set up to try and address environmental problems. It cuts across, obviously, water and air and climate. It cuts across multiple sectors. As you are doing with your action plan, you are having to coordinate across different ministries. You mentioned agriculture, transport, energy, and I imagine that can't be particularly easy. I mean, there are power dynamics, there's politics involved. And so just if you could share perhaps some of your experience of that coordination across different ministries and how you've been able to, or not, kind of create a more integrated approach to nitrogen across these different kind of power sources in the Sri Lankan government.
Thank you very much. Interesting question. Actually, it is a difficult task. Like you mentioned, it's a challenging task. So, but anyway, one thing actually we found, so then most of them are not aware about it. Even industry, there are some guideline standards how the effluent quality could be like that, but they are to a certain extent adhering, because there is a license system that they have to, if an industry, every year they have to renew the license, so then they have to show how the emission status like that. So then, but they are not aware about this sustainable nitrogen management. Even when we did series of farm surveys, and they said that, I mean, they know the negative impact of application of pesticides, herbicides like that, but application of fertilizer is, I mean, they are not seeing, it is going to be having direct impact, negative impact to them. And also even the coastal bed people, they don't realize, they don't know how the upstream mismanagement is going to impact on them. So that, but anyway, when we, I mean, one thing, so the leadership is and top bottom approach, we are at right now, what we are giving more focus on the top bottom approach, because the focal point of the Ministry of Agriculture. So then when the secretary is, since it is now we have to develop a national action plan, when the message is shared with all the ministries, so then the ministries are listening, and then they actually they are cooperating. I mean, but anyway, I mean, we are not saying, we are not actually instructing to go, I mean, a strict regulation like that, but what we could do to achieve that is what we are gathering right now, whether we can do and what is the ambition. And then again, certain like industry, I mean, the transport, even people say that though we are planning to electrify and things like that, whether we can reach with the financial status right now with the countries facing, whether we have the capital to invest like that. But ambition and suggestions are there. How to implement, we have to find modalities. But people now, I mean, getting to know about this, and they are willing to cooperate. I don't think that there is anybody to reduction of waste, nobody can argue, and they are supportive. So then we are developing the network, and we are actually approaching both mainly the top bottom, and also we are grassroots level, bottom up approach is carrying out as well. We can doing that with the work 0.1 and also the 2.2, we are approaching on that aspects as well. So then I think, though it is challenging, I think when the people get to know about their seriousness, so then they try to attempt, but how far we can go and achieve is a challenging thing with the technology and also the financial support that the government could give.
Thank you. So I'm going to try. I want to ask a question of each of you, and then, but I'm also aware that we want to get through to the Q&A as well. So, Annie, you. Also a great presentation, and I was struck by one thing you noted about actually the level of support in Sri Lanka for that specific policy in Sri Lanka of transitioning to organic farming, that there was 80% farmer support with the assumption that it would be properly implemented. And at least with regards to organic farming, and you mentioned this too, you know, in many systems that can be associated with a yield decrease, and how you square that circle between yield decreases and the fact that there was such farmer support, where, you know, income from crop sales is so important. And I know that's been a big discussion point in the kind of transition to more organic systems, is this yield decrease, and especially in the global south, where that can really mean the difference between you know, a sustainable income and an unsustainable income.
I'm mute. I imagine Nissanka actually might be better, much better able to answer this question, but I'll do my best, and Nissanka, please come in. But yeah, no, I mean, like I said, I just looked at these sort of policy examples this week, so I'm by no means an expert, but yeah, it just mentioned that there was this survey that took place, and I don't know how many respondents there were, but 80% of those who took part in the survey showed support. But that was like with the caveat that would be a transition, right? It's not an overnight thing. And I think, you know, like I said, in the original mandate, I think it was stated that it was like moving from 1% to 30%. So unlike Bhutan and Sikkim, it wasn't like a full, you know, movement into organic, but just, you know, partly so. Yeah, so, but yeah, it certainly wasn't in place, and I think it's clear that there were other reasons behind the decisions from the leaders at the time to put that into practice, basically because of financial, you know, decisions and the goals to save money. But yeah, I think, you know, and we're seeing that trade-off in not trade-off, but in Bhutan, obviously things are going more slowly, and there's still that ambition to sort of go more organic. But yeah, sort of grappling with the food security priorities, which of course has to be the priority. But yeah, I think it's having those right incentives in place, whether or not, you know, and sort of ensuring that's a gradual process, and supporting capacity and training and all these other things that need to come into it, and ensuring there's even a market there for the produce. So it was really interesting. I read what the Kim had done, and again, I'm sure there's more experts here today who could say more on this, but it was also banning the import of certain commodities into the state to ensure that there's a market for the product that they were producing in the state. So again, I don't know so much about that, but it's also interesting because that you always hear that, you know, that there's this ambition to have those types of products, but then where to sell them, and, you know, and again, the ambition wasn't just to export them, but to make a market within the state itself. So that was important to, you know, keep things going, and also not be just completely dependent on exporting and, you know, the needs of others. So more self-sufficiency in that regard. But sorry, I don't know if I entirely answered your question.
No, that was great. It added a lot of important texture and color to that. So thank you. Quickly through to Vincent. You know, as we're talking about kind of the challenge of halving nitrogen waste, it's also when I think about the African context, and obviously that is, even just saying that is very reductive, as you were pointing out, solutions in one part of Africa are going to be very different than in another part of Africa. But I think back to this paper that Xinjiang and Eric Davidson, who I saw is one of the participants here, wrote a few years ago about kind of tunneling through the Kuznets curve for nitrogen, of avoiding this trajectory of as more and more nitrogen use, as more access and use of nitrogen increases, that you see this dip in nitrogen use efficiency and increase in nitrogen losses, and then only after time then do you see these increases in nitrogen use efficiency. And about countries that are kind of still going through that trajectory, tunneling through or avoiding that similar trajectory that other countries have done. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that, Vincent, and, you know, what to you are the absolute necessary. You talked about some of the necessary resources in terms of investment and technology, but you know, when thinking about leapfrogging or fast forwarding through these more polluting trajectories, what are some of the resources and insights, and also the science that can be done to help from an African perspective? And I think you're on mute.
Thank you very much, David. I think I was actually looking at you know, it's unfortunate that the African Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit that's supposed to take place next month in Nairobi have been postponed to 2024. In fact, some of the issues that you raise are actually to be tackled at a special ministerial summit. Well, I'm reading from somewhere, there's one imperative for a veritable information system in Africa: partnership, finance, and policies. And I was supposed to be the main speaker at that summit. So I believe some African countries are making progress, but what is actually needed is most times the policymakers, their views actually differ. I think it's the policy that drives this in Africa. So I believe, as a person, that at the level of the African Union, if we're able to convince our political leaders with real success stories, the narrative is going to change in Africa. That's my view. Because I've seen a few countries like Nigeria, Ethiopia, Ghana, Rwanda, I think South Africa, making much progress, because there are some individuals in institutions that are able to show proof of concept that this can work, but it need to be scalable and for the policy makers to accept and adopt it. And that's why I was talking about, in the context of Africa, we need to conceptualize the one that is acceptable to us. I can say this is our own. That's my view.
Thank you, Vincent. Gisleine, as I was thinking about your presentation, one aspect in one of the upcoming chapters that I'm involved in the International Nitrogen Assessment, which will be released next year, hopefully next summer, and which I think you're all in some way contributing, and probably many of you also attendees, so thank you. One of the ideas we talk about is this concept, this governance concept of telecoupling, this idea that all kind of nitrogen flows and the drivers of nitrogen flows are connected internationally. So for example, the nitrogen use and pollution in places like Brazil and Latin America are very much driven by consumption patterns in OECD countries, in Western Europe and North America. And so a lot of those drivers of the kind of crops that are grown or the livestock that is produced is very much driven by trends that are outside, beyond Latin America's borders. And so I was wondering if you can speak to that, if there are, I know I'm kind of putting a huge issue on your plate here, but I guess the limits of what national policies can do when the drivers are very much beyond kind of these things that national governments can control.
Okay, thank you for your question. I think it's very tricky, but I don't think that there is or will be national policies to restrain the quantity or how the amount of countries can export. So they will always produce more and more, because especially in our region, because agriculture is the most important economic sector. So it's I don't have any hope that this kind of policy could happen, because of this, and also because economically Latin American countries, as most of the countries in the world, are facing economic slowdown, post-pandemic economic slowdown. So if we can growing our exports of our agricultural commodities exports, I think all countries in Latin America will do it. So maybe in the future we can do something like that, but I think it's not in the near future. So it's really, really difficult to have something like that.
Of course, I know it's very easy for me. I always enjoy being kind of the host in these situations, because it's easy for me to ask the questions, but I always hate being asked difficult questions. So I apologize.
No problem.
So thank you all for your very interesting question in the Q&A. I think Edin's been keeping an eye on it and kind of grouping certain questions by theme. So Edin, I pass over to you if you want to kind of administer some of those questions and kind of group them together.
Absolutely. Good morning and good afternoon and good night to everyone. So I think there's a few specific technical questions in here, but I'm seeing them fall into the idea of what is the biggest challenge that we face in having nitrogen at the moment? And is this current issue the same that will be our biggest issue in the future? So it's a two-part question. What is our biggest current challenge to implementation of nitrogen loss reduction? And then also, is that the same that you foresee in the future?
I don't know if anyone wants to jump in on this one. Annie or Nissanka, I'm happy to briefly speak to it, but then I would love to, I think thinking about the future, I want to leave the challenges to those that have spoken already, but thinking about the future, there is a lot of discussion about different nitrogen uses to actually help decarbonize the global economy, whether it be shifting to ammonia as a shipping fuel or even as an energy source. There are a couple of really new, interesting projects focused on that, on the promise and potential opportunities, but also, you know, some some of the consequences that need to be considered with regards to a shift to green ammonia. And so if we shift, for example, to ammonia as a major source of energy and shipping fuel, that would be a huge increase in the amount of Haber-Bosch nitrogen being produced. And so kind of the nitrogen implications of decarbonization, I think are going to be really important. And so it may well be that kind of ironically, as we try to address one of the major other environmental problems that we face, climate change, it could have serious implications for nitrogen. Obviously, nitrogen is both a contributor to climate change through nitrous oxide, but if many of the solutions to climate change involve an increase in nitrogen production, that could also have serious implications for nitrogen pollution and our ability to we may be not talking about halving nitrogen waste, but doubling reactive nitrogen into the Earth system. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to some of the other challenges of halving nitrogen waste.
I could just say something briefly, but it was just back to the, you know, the problem when I was sort of showing that slide for South Asia, and it was just highlighting that the problem is different for different countries, though it's not obviously just about agriculture at all, which I'm sure many of us are aware, but it was, you know, highlighting as well. So for the Maldives, for example, its transportation is one of the biggest drivers of increasing NOx, and so, you know, that's about tackling that. And so when you talk about emerging issues, it's sort of keeping that in mind. So of course, the issue with nitrogen waste from agriculture is not a solved issue at all, but yeah, just keeping track that there's, you know, for different nations and different countries, those, I think you also showed that in your graph, that for certain countries and different compounds are more important than others, especially when it comes to increasing. So I noted that Afghanistan had the 600% increase of NOx from 2000 to 2015, and a lot of that's to do with, yeah, transportation and the burning of, you know, biofuels and things like that. So it was just keeping those things in mind.
Thank you.
Can I add?
Yes, go ahead, Nissanka.
Okay, so then actually it's a very good question. Though we are proposing, we have the ambition. There are a lot of challenges and there are a lot of needs to be addressed. For example, like country where the financial limitations are, there are always cost is a big issue, right? If we can get advanced technologies in a cost-effective manner, right? So then that is one of the way of approaching. For example, if I take agriculture sector, nitrous oxide emission and the ammonia emission, total country's emission, like about 75 to 80% comes from the agriculture sector. So then we are still using the straight fertilizers and NPK. So then we can, I mean, since it is cheap, farmers cannot be convinced to use slow releasing or compound type of fertilizer because of the cost factor. So the government is also giving subsidy and things like that for the straight fertilizer. It is somewhat, somewhat cheaper compared to other. So then unless otherwise we do a detailed cost benefit analysis, even with the going for advanced type of fertilizer, overall can benefited more. So then that type of, again, research and assessment has to be there. Right now, actually, we are doing, why not invest for the right, anyway, the government is investing on the straight fertilizer, why not invest for the advanced type, though it is going to be somewhat cost, but the efficiency is going to be improved. So then those things are financial and also technology and the knowledge, the research and development and the knowledge-based development are the challenging task in the especially countries like ours. So the people are willing to, if it is going to be cost-effective, unless otherwise, though we try to attempt some, if it is not the sort of a cost-effective, people always go for the cheaper sources. So that is where actually we need to address at the policy level intervention. Some sort of that is needed.
Well, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Vincent.
I just want another perspective. Well, I don't know how it will be taken, but in some parts of Africa, there's something that is often neglected, but which is actually very valid. It's actually called indigenous knowledge system. And actually, these are things that are not in the established rules and books. But of course, you learn from some of the local people, and you actually find out that there are technology that they cannot explain that they are using to solve end losses and end problems, which I believe the nitrogen scientists, including the social scientists, need to look at. I think there are some valuable lessons we can learn from them that we can incorporate. It is called indigenous knowledge system. Now, I think the social scientists need to look at that area and bring it to technical people to look at very quickly.
Yeah, I also agree. Exploring that traditional knowledge is important as well.
Thank you very much. The great variety of answers there. And also thank you. I see the panelists are answering in real time also some of the questions. So that's really great. Edin, I don't know if we probably have time for one more question from the Q&A, if there's something we want to address.
Sure. I think there's another theme emerging, which would be really interesting to understand. How folks, so in your own work, what are the most common misconceptions that you come across? I think folks have started to touch on this in their advocacy, whether it was cost effectiveness or proof of use and proof of case. So what are your most common misconceptions, and how can we as scientists, science advocates, communicators best meet that challenge? How can we be more effective communicators on that specific issue that you encounter?
So yes, I mean, I think that a lot of, just to also add to that, nitrogen is it can be a difficult issue to talk about because especially in parts of the world where there is still very much a need to guarantee food security. So in terms of communicating on this topic and the importance of having nitrogen losses while also guaranteeing enough nutritious food, what are some of the ways that you found are helpful in communicating that challenge and the importance of more sustainable nitrogen management? Again, easy question to end things with.
Yes, I'd like to just comment that here in Brazil, there's not much people working on the nitrogen subject, and also it's the knowledge about the nitrogen dichotomy, the benefits and the impacts, is almost no. So even for people work on the agriculture sector, they know that we need fertilizers, but we don't know, they don't know, or we in general don't know the impacts that the excess or misuse of nitrogen can have in the environment. Just to give you an example, last year we have this national plan for fertilizers in Brazil, and it's very ambitious. So the aim is to produce our own fertilizers in Brazil because of this and the world crisis, and especially the Ukraine war, that difficult a little bit to get the fertilizers, to import fertilizers. So there's incentives to improve the fertilizer industry they use, and it's a document that talks much about the need of fertilizers, its importance and everything, but there is nothing about the impacts. There's nothing about the counterpart of how to protect environment against excess of misuse. So this is, I think it's kind of difficult, not only in Brazil, but maybe in all countries, other countries in Latin America and other regions as well.
Thank you, Gisleine. We have time probably for one final quick comment. If there is anyone from the panelists that wants to go. Nissanka?
Again, in agriculture sector, farmers' belief is more green means more yield. So then, I mean, then more green means they think they need to apply more nitrogen. Even, I mean, now in our SNH trial, we have one Department of Agriculture recommendation and also the farmer recommendation. Usually, farmer add more, about 25-50% more nitrogen, because they want to see the crop all the time green. Because since cropping is a risky business, and also if farmer get lost, there is no insurance scheme. So then because of that, they don't take any risk of failing the crop due to nutrient limitation. I mean, like economically growing farmers, they apply more. Another thing, when the government giving subsidy, right, when they get it free or cheaper, so then they apply more. So then actually we are now convincing the government to not to go for, I mean, wholesale like subsidy scheme. It has to be scientifically assess and regulate, unless otherwise overuse is going to be very much with the subsidy scheme as well.
Thank you. Thanks to Nissanka. Thank you so much. Thank you to all our panelists for such a great diversity of perspectives, geographic and disciplinary and policy perspectives. Thank you to all of you for being here. I'm excited to say that our next webinar will be in person in New Delhi, all together at the 9th International Nitrogen Conference. Very excited to see many of you there. As always, we will hopefully continue this. We plan to continue this webinar series after the conference as well. And if there are any ideas or suggestions or things you'd like to see discussed or suggestions for speakers and topics, please reach out to me. Please reach out to Edin. We also will have in the next couple of weeks a new and revamped INI website where there will be easier to kind of sign up to mailing lists and have contact details there. So that will all just be easier to maintain the INI and nitrogen community. Thank you all so much. We will also post the recording of this when it's done on the new website. So really appreciate it. Thanks again to all the panelists, and have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank